Welcome, everybody. Welcome to week 13 of the Sephardi Habura. I believe we're week 13 or week 14. Neil, good to see you. We've got some guests as well from Rav Kada's community. Everybody, Baruch haba, welcome. We're just going to wait a few minutes for everybody to come in. I'll give a little introduction about the Sephardi Habura, and then we'll begin with Rav Kada's shiur tonight. Adrian, good to see you again. Mr. Mark Moses, good to see you.
Hi.
Welcome. Yoshua, welcome. Okay, welcome everybody. Really good to see you all. We are now at week 14 of the Sephardi Habura. If you're wondering what the Sephardi Habura is, it's something that we've been establishing an initiative in Northwest London, where we have set up a virtual and soon to be physical Bet Midrash, where we are learning Torah through the lens of classical Sephardi Hachamim. We are now at week 14. A lot of the Talmidim are going to be joining us tonight. We're very excited to have a regular contributor to the Habura, Rav Daniel Kada, tonight to speak a little bit about Yom Kippur, Sukkot, but through the lens of Sepharad, and just some housekeeping for the Talmidim of the Bet Midrash who are in the meeting room now. As you know, next week we have a very, very exciting event with Professor Moshe Halbertal, famous biographer of Harambam. His latest book on Haramban, Nachmanides, is out in a few weeks' time. So he's kind enough to come and speak to us about the different Sephardi approaches with regards to Rambam and Ramban, and how two giants of Sepharad within the same community in Spain, or within the same geographical location of Spain, came out with such drastically different schools of thought. So we're very excited for that. And the week after that, we have Rav Dweck's new series on Sephardi principles through Teshubot. So we'll be going through a number of Teshubot from Hacham Matlub Abadi to Hacham Ovadia Yosef, Hacham Chaim David Halavi, Hacham Ben Zion Uziel, dealing with different Teshubot on different matters with regards to halacha, innovation in halacha, kashrut, holiness, etc., etc. So for everyone in the group, everyone who's in the WhatsApp group, you'll be made aware of it. Everyone else, please feel free to put your email in so that we can keep in touch with you guys in the chat. Without further ado, very, very excited to have, as I mentioned, the regular contributor of Daniel Kada. Rav Kada, the floor is yours. We're very, very excited.
Thank you very much, Sina, for your warm introduction as always. And as always, I just want to say, as I've said in the past, what a wonderful organization you have managed to create. I'm just putting this on Facebook as we talk, sorry. What a wonderful organization this is, the tremendous amount of work and effort that you're putting into this Chabura, and the incredible speakers. I'm honored to be listed amongst the speakers, Professor Halbertal, Tzvi Zohar, these kind of people. It's an honor to be sharing the same platform as these great Chachamim. So, I'm just putting in the title on Facebook and we'll get going. Okay. Fine. Hi, hi.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, wonderful, everyone. So I hope everyone had a wonderful Rosh Hashanah. And now we're on to the next part of the marathon, moving on to Yom Kippur now. And Sukkot, of course. Yom Kippur and Sukkot are so tightly connected. only 4 days in between. The Gemara actually says that there's no time to sin in between Yom Shana and Yom Kippur. We're so busy preparing from one to the next, there's no time to sin. So therefore we decided that today what we're going to do is we're going to combine both Yom Kippur and Sukkot, and we're going to discuss the Sephardi approach to many of the halachot in the context of Sukkot, then share another idea on Sukkot, again where we see the contrast between Sephardi Rishonim and European Rishonim, and then do the same for Yom Kippur. In total, I want to share with you 4 different ideas, 2 on Sukkot, 2 on Yom Kippur, again, all within the same framework of the contrast between Sephardim and Ashkenazim. And I decided we'll begin with Sukkot. We'll begin with Sukkot, 2 ideas from Sukkot, and then we're going to end with 2 ideas from Yom Kippur. So let's start with Sukkot. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat box as we go along. So there are a number of mahlokot in the context of Sukkot. 7 points where there is controversy in the halachot of Sukkot, which can all be answered with one yesod, with one principle. In yeshiva, what you do is you take a sugya, you examine it, and always the best answer is the one which can answer all the questions in one shot, right? You can have a question and an answer, question and answer, but 3 questions and 3 answers isn't the same as 3 questions with 1 answer. So what we're going to do here is go through 7 examples and with one yesod, one principle, explain how actually all works out beautifully. So bear with me, and I want you to bear in mind the names of the Rishonim we are mentioning. It's very important to pay attention to who we are talking about, the names of the Rishonim, when we go through these 7 points, because you'll see at the end what the common theme is. So let's start from the beginning. Point number 1. When do we recite the blessing of Leshev Basukkah? When do we say the blessing? So the Gemara in Sukkah 45b brings the mahloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yehuda holds only the first time you enter the Sukkah do you recite the bracha of Leshev Basukkah. The rest of the 7 days you don't recite it. Just like matzah, we only say a blessing on the first night and the second night in the diaspora, but then not again. So too Sukkot is the same. Rabbi Yochanan, however, holds that any time you enter the Sukkah, you recite the blessing any of the 7 days. And the Gemara says that all the rabbis held like Rabbi Yochanan, and therefore every time you enter the Sukkah, you make a blessing of Leshev Basukkah. This is codified very clearly by Harambam. Let's share the screen. Says Harambam, Kol zeman sheikanes Leshev Basukkah, Kol shiv'a mevarech kodem sheyeshev asher kidishan sotah v'tiyashev b'sukkah. Any time you enter to sit in the Sukkah, any of the 7 days, you say the bracha Leshev Basukkah as you go in. That's clear. And this is the opinion of many of the Rishonim, and no one really had a problem with this. However, the Rosh on this Gemara, he brings down the Rambam, he brings down this opinion, but then he goes on to bring Rabbenutam. Now, it's important to understand who Rabbenutam was. Rabbenutam is basically the equivalent for the Rambam in the Ashkenazi world, at least in medieval Europe. Ashkenazi Rishonim are extremely hesitant to argue with Rabbenutam. When Rabbenutam says something, it's very difficult to argue with him. The Rishonim post Rabbenutam rarely argue straight out against Rabbenutam. So he was French Bal Tosafot, 12th century, grandson of Rashi. And he comes along, he's the first one to say this, and he says, no, you only make a blessing on eating in the Sukkah and nothing else. If you sleep in the Sukkah, you chat in the Sukkah, any other things which you do in the Sukkah, you don't recite the blessing. Only when you're sitting to eat bread do you say the bracha of Leshev Basukkah. Now, the Tur brings down both opinions, and then finally the Shulchan Aruch writes as follows. Let's have a look at the screen. Shulchan Aruch writes, this is in 639-8. Nahagu she'en mevarchim al sukkah ela b'shat achila. Note the word here, nahagu. It's customary to only recite the blessing when you're eating in the sukkah. So he doesn't say you're not allowed to. He says, nahagu, it's customary to do so. So obviously the minhag had evolved. As I said, Rabbenutam carries great weight in the halachic world. And because of his opinion, as I said, he was the first one to voice this opinion. Because of his opinion, what happened was there was a slow evolution until we get to Maran Shulchan Aruch in the 16th century, where the custom has basically become widespread that you only recite the blessing of Leshev Sukkah when you actually eat in the sukkah. One community didn't follow this, and that's the Temanim. Temanim still till today do follow the Rambam, and they'll recite Leshev Sukkah at any time. So we have to understand what this mahloket is. Why? What's going on here? That's point number one. As I said, I'm going to go through 7 of these points. Number 2, first night of Sukkah. Now we've had wonderful weather over the past few days, very uncharacteristic of September, but unfortunately our luck has run out today. And we don't know if what's going to be in 10 days from now, Friday night, maybe 9 days from now, Friday night, what the weather will be. But currently I read that it's actually it looks like there's going to be a storm coming to England. Doesn't look good for Sukkot. So what happens if it's raining on the first night of Sukkot? So we know it's a basic Talmudic principle that mitzta'er patur min sukkah. If it's not comfortable, it's raining, you're exempt from sitting in the sukkah. And no one ever differentiated between any of the nights of Sukkot. And this is clear in Shulchan Aruch. Again, I'm showing you all the sources so you appreciate and you see it inside. And again, pay attention to the names being quoted. So, says the Shulchan Aruch that Yardu Geshamim, you have Hebrew and English there, Hareze nichnas letoch habayit. If it's raining, you go inside. From when the time your food starts to get spoiled, that's it. You go inside. Full stop. If it's raining, seemingly any time during the course of Sukkot, you go into the sukkah. You go into your house. You leave the sukkah. Says the Rama, the small print is always the Rama. Have a look here at the end. The kol zeh dafke b'shar yamim or lelot shel Sukkot. This is on all other nights and days of Sukkot. Aval laila harishona tzarich le'echol kazait b'sukkah af im geshamim yordim. On the first night of Sukkot and the second night as well outside of Israel, you must eat a kazait in a sukkah even if it's pouring with rain. So there you have it. It's pouring with rain. You have to eat in the sukkah. Even if the entire night you don't manage to find a moment during the evening when it's actually not raining, the entire night it's raining, you have to go out and eat a kazait of bread in the sukkah. What's the mahloket? Why? Where does he get this from? Right? And I didn't say, but the Rama, if you look at the source of the Rama was, surprisingly or not, who do you think the source is going to be? The Rosh. Okay, so it's the Rosh the second time. The Rosh saying that second night and first night you have to eat in the sukkah even if it's raining. Why? Number 3. When Kiddush isn't recited, so let's say Chol HaMoed, I sit down to have a meal. Which blessing do you say first? Do you say Hamotzi first, or do you say Leshev Basukkah first? Okay, so I've no Kiddush. I've just got bread in front of me. I've got Hamotzi to say, and I have Leshev Basukkah, the blessing on the Sukkah and the blessing on Hamotzi, 2 blessings in front of me. Which one do I say first? So again, here we have a mahloket, and guess who the mahloket is going to be between? Says the Shulchan Aruch 643. Bishar Yamim nevarech al sukkah kodem birkat hamotzi. On whenever you're not having kiddush, you say the blessing of leshev basukkah before hamotzi. Okay, leave out the next time. We'll come to that later. Okay, that. So yeah, on all other days you say sukkah first. Then the Shulchan Aruch says the son of the custom that you first say hamotzi and then the sukkah, and says the Rama b'hachi nagin. That's the custom to do so. So here you have a third mahloket. That Shulchan Aruch is telling us that mikar hadin, the real halacha should be that you say leshev basukkah first, and only then do you say hamotzi. Whereas the Rama, quoting the Rosh again, saying that you first say Hamotzi, and only then you say Lesher Basuka. Why? What's the mahloket? That's point number 3. Point number 4. Again, if I feel free to interject if you don't understand, you want a clarification, that's fine. I'm just going through the facts, and then I'm gonna. Yeah. So Jack, yes, but note, he recognizes the custom of that order, but there's a reason why he quotes the Ikar Hadin, which I'll come to. Yeah, he does say Noagim, but he begins by saying the Ikar Hadin, to say Lesher Basuka first. Point number 4. Is Kiddush recited standing or sitting on Sukkot? So generally, no, it's not. Gosh, it's not an issue of tradition or tadir. It's not, and I'll come to that later. 4th point. Generally speaking, Kiddush, let's say on Shabbat morning, we come home and we Sephardim, we sit down for Kiddush, and that's how we do the Kiddush. Very interestingly, though, and people are unaware of this halacha, on Sukkot, Shulchan Aruch tells us very clearly that you should really be doing Kiddush standing up. So on Shabbat or on Sukkot during the day, in the night we anyway stand up. But in the day, you come home, you're doing Kiddush. That Kiddush on Sukkot, anytime during Sukkot, should be done standing up. Says the Shulchan Aruch. Let's see that inside. L'Rambam mekadesh me'umad umvarech leshe besukkah v'yoshev. So you have to do, says the Shulchan Aruch, doesn't quote any other opinions, just the Rambam's opinion. You do Kiddush standing up, and you say leshe besukkah, and then you sit down. Says the Rama, ve'en nohagim ken ela mekachin miyushav. You don't do that, says the Rama for the Ashkenazim. You do Kiddush sitting down. And look at the 3 key words, v'chen, dat, harosh. And this is the opinion of the Rosh. So you can already start to see the theme here, what's going on, okay? So this is Mahloket number 4. Rambam telling us that Kiddush, any time during Sukkot, Shabbat included, should be said standing up, even during the day. The Rosh telling us that no, Kiddush is said sitting down on Sukkot. That's point number 4. Now, point number 5 isn't a Mahloket, but it's something interesting to think about. We know in the Torah, whenever we talk about eating, whenever the Torah says lo tochilu or tochlu something, it's always a kazait. Lo tochlu kol nevela, don't eat something non-kosher, that's a kazait. Eat matzot, that's a kazait. Always when the Torah talks about achila, it's always. So can you cancel the spotlight video? So I don't know who spotlighted himself. Samuel, you must you must be, everyone wants to see your face. Don't know how that happened. Okay, we'll continue. Great. So whenever the Torah talks about achila, eating in the Torah's context is always a kazait. Okay, we're not going into now what a kazait means. That's a shiur for another time. Okay, kazait ranges from 3 grams to about 28 grams. Let's leave that for now. So let's accept kazait. So whenever you, interestingly though, we find a halacha in the context of Sukkot, which seems to go against this. Halacha is, again in Shulchan Aruch, that you're allowed to eat outside the sukkah kebetzav mipat, about a beitza of bread, which is double a kazait. So you're allowed to eat outside the sukkah, even though you're not meant to eat outside the sukkah. So I would expect normally you shouldn't be able to eat even a kazait outside. Anything less than that I can, a kazait or more I can't. They were being told not like that. I'm allowed to eat even a you're allowed to eat even a kabetza of bread. Daniel, is that in the context of Sukkot? Okay, so I'll come to that. That's because the Ben Ish Chai followed the Rosh and the Ramah, which is not uncommon at all. I'll come to that. Okay, and in fact, I'm not sure the Kaf HaChaim says that. By the way, I remember the Kaf HaChaim saying the contrary, but I'll double check that. Ben Ish Chai may be right. The Kaf HaChaim, I would want to see that inside. I remember the opposite, but we'll come to that. So we have to bear that in mind. That's point number 5. Why is it that we find this exception on Sukkot that you're allowed to have even sorry, if I didn't say it, kabetza is double a kazait. You're allowed to have double a kazait outside the Sukkah, which seems to go against anywhere else when it talks about achila in the Torah. Point number 6, and this can be common, unfortunately, especially this year, because not everyone's building Sukkot and shuls aren't building the communal Sukkot. Let's say I don't have my own Sukkah. So now, on the one hand, I have a contract. What am I meant to do here? On the one hand, I'm commanded to eat mitzvah of having a seudah on Chag and on Shabbat. So I need to be having a seudah. On the other hand, I can't eat a kabetza of pats. What's the solution? What should I do? Yeah, what am I meant to do? On the one hand, I need to eat a meal for the Chag. On the other hand, I can't eat a meal for the Chag because I don't have to eat a kabetza of pats. What should I do? What's the simple solution? Obviously. Come on, guys, what's the simple solution?
Kazayat. So you have a kazayat of bread.
Very good. So Mishnah Berurah, very good. Mishnah Berurah in Hilchot Shabbat 291 says that you may be able to fulfill the mitzvot of Seudot Shabbat with a kazayat. And that's generally the poskim say. They say, look, if you don't have a sukkah on Shabbat and on Chag, at the very least, fulfill the mitzvah of Seudot Shabbat and Chag, have a kazayat, don't have a kabetza. Like this, you're allowed to eat a kazayat because it's less than a kabetza, you're allowed to eat outside the sukkah. At the same time, you've managed to fulfill the mitzvah of eating a seudah on the Chag and on Shabbat. Great. Comes along.
Presumably, if you have to do that, you presumably can't make a bracha on Nitlat Yadayim. I mean, that's a slightly different halacha, but that's a practical point.
Correct. That's correct. That's yeah. You're right. We don't do less than. Fine. I'll address your point at the end, Daniel. Okay. Now, thank you for the reference. Now, comes along the Eliyah Rabbah in Acharon, but he quotes Rabbeinu Avigdor of Vienna. It's an Ashkenazi. He was the teacher of the Maram in Rothenburg. Rabbeinu Avigdor, he quotes him that actually you shouldn't do that on Shabbat and on Chag. Why? As follows. We have a principle that you need to take maaser. Okay, and time's gone by. You need to take a maaser, a tenth of produce. Now, you don't need to take maaser if you're just eating achilat arai. Achilat arai means, let's say I'm planning on taking maaser, but now I'm just, I'm pecking at some grapes. Okay, I don't need to take maaser because I haven't yet actually decided this is the fruit I'm going to eat. I haven't been kovei, I haven't fixed and sat down to it. I'm just pecking here and there. I'm allowed to eat without taking maaser. And normally you're not allowed to. If you've decided, if you've been kovei seudah, you're not allowed to eat before taking maaser, before taking the time. But achilat hara is permissible. However, the Mishnah in Maasrot, and this is also Gemara in Beitzah as well, says very clearly that if you eat from your produce which hasn't been tithed on Shabbat, even if it's an achilat hara, I'm just pecking, that's considered achilat keva. That's considered a fixed seudah. Why? Because of Shabbat and Chag, it's koveya. The sanctity, the uniqueness of Shabbat and Chag makes any food which you eat considered a kviyut, considered something permanent, and therefore you have to take maaser before even pecking from fruit on Shabbat and Chag. That's the halacha. That's clear. It's not debated. Comes along Rabbeinu Avigdor of Vienna and he says, look, since we have this principle in Maasrot that Shabbat is koveya for achilah, it makes the food you're eating permanent. Therefore, on Sukkot, even though generally speaking the principle is that you're allowed to eat less than a kabetza outside the sukkah, this does not apply on Shabbat and Chag. Because like we find in Maasrot, Shabbat and Chag is koveya, it makes the food you're eating a proper meal. So too, for eating outside the sukkah, it's now considered, despite you eating less than a kabetza, you're eating something very little. Nonetheless, that's enough to be considered that you're being koveya seudah, you're having a proper meal, and therefore you're unable to eat that outside the sukkah. So according to Rabbeinu Avigdor, because of Seudot Shabbat is so important, that's koveya, even if you're having less than a kabetza, and therefore this solution won't work. However, both the Hida and the Ginat Vradim, the Ginat Vradim was the Bi Avraham ben Mordechai Levi of Egypt, 17th century. They both say not like that. They rule that you should actually eat a kazait outside the sukkah if you do not have a sukkah. Why? What's the mahloket here? What's the point here? And number 7, the final point before we tie this all up together. Many blessings, if you look at, if you think about the blessings which we say, some of the blessings, think of Rosh Hashanah, we said, Lishmoa, Ashek Jam Tetzvanu, Lishmoa Kol Shofar, to hear the Kol Shofar. Think of Pesach, we say, Al Achilat Matzah. We don't say Le'echol Matzah. We don't say Ashek Jam Tetzvanu Le'echol Matzah. We say Ashek Jam Tetzvanu Al Achilat Matzah. Go through all the brachot which we make. Sometimes you'll find them Al, sometimes you'll find them Lehaniach Tefillin, Lehitatef Betzitzit, Al HaTevilah, Al HaShechita. Many brachot are Al, many brachot are Le. Why, when it comes to Sukkot, is the bracha Ashek Jam Tetzvanu Lesheb Sukkah and not Al Yeshivat Sukkah? So I'm going to recap these 7 points, and then we're going to answer this all with one principle. So just to summarize, number 1, when do we make the blessing of Sheba Sukkah? According to our Rambam, any time you enter the Sukkah. According to Rabbenutam and the Rosh, only when you eat. Number 2, if it's raining on the first night of Sukkot, according to Rambam and Shulchan Aruch, you do not eat in the Sukkah. You don't need to eat in the Sukkah. According to the Rosh, you do need to eat in the Sukkah. Point number 3, when you're just saying Hamotzi and Leshev, you don't have Kiddush. According to Shulchan Aruch, you say Leshev Basukah and then Hamotzi. According to the Ramah and the Rosh, you say Leshev, Hamotzi and then Leshev Basukah. Point number 4, according to the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch, on Sukkot and Shabbat in Sukkot, you do Kiddush standing up. According to the Ramah and the Rosh, you do Kiddush sitting down. Point number 5 is into Mahloket, but it's something we need to consider. Why is it that we're allowed to eat even a kabetza outside the sukkah and not just a kazait? Point number 6, we saw this mahloket, a later mahloket, but nonetheless an important one, that when you're unable to have a sukkah, are you allowed to eat a kazait for the Sodot of Shabbat or not? According to Rabbeinu Avigdor and Eliyahu Rabbah and some Ashkenazi poskim, you're not allowed to, because Shabbat is koveya. According to the Hida and the Ginat Vadim, the poskim Sfaradim, you should eat a kazait outside the sukkah. And the 7th point which we raise is why the blessing is lesheb basukkah and not achilat sukkah. Is that clear? So we have 7 points here. Any questions on this before we move on? Okay, so there is one principle to understand all these arguments, and that's as follows. The Torah tells us, Basukot teshvu shiv'at yamim. You shall dwell in Sukkot for 7 days. Clear in Parshat Emor. What does the word yeshiva mean? What does it mean? Ba'erev teshvu, Basukot teshvu basukot. The simple meaning, which is all the Rishonim and the Geonim understood until Rabbenutam came along, was yeshiva means yeshiva. It means hanging around, making a phone call. If I'm sitting in the sukkah making my business phone calls during the week, do that in the sukkah. That's your dwelling. You make a bracha on that. That's teshvu basukot. Rabbenutam, however, was adamant that achila refers to eating. And he writes the following, the Torah quotes this, Ikar kavi'ut she'adam oseh basukah hi ha'achila. The main intention when Hashem gave the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah, the main intention was eating. That's the main thing. Everything else is ancillary to eating. Eating is the main aspect of yeshiva on Sukkot. When the Torah says Basukot teshvu shiv'at yamim, that means the most important is that you eat in the sukkah. Therefore, according to Rabbenutam and the Rosh and all those that followed him, the Ramah and Ashkenazi, you only make a blessing when you eat in the sukkah, because this is the Torah's intention when it says teshvu basukot. It's talking about eating. That's the Ikar Kaviyot. That was the Hashkadosh Baruch Hu's intention when he gave the mitzvah. The main dwelling is eating, and therefore, even if you sleep in the sukkah, if you're not actually eating, you can't make a blessing. I wanted to say, just briefly, is that there's a famous Rosh in the context. I'll say this very quickly. I'm not going to go into all the details. the famous Rosh in Hilchot Shabbat, in Masechet Shabbat, when the machloket of Hananya and Chachamim with regards to Shehiyah, is Shehiyah Mevushal Kol Tzorko, or is it Ma'achal Ben Drusai? Okay, I'm not explaining these terms, I'm just throwing out. Those understand, great. If not, don't worry about it. Right? There's a big machloket there, and many Rishonim paskin it's like Chachamim. But the Rosh says that Bnei Yisrael adukim b'mitzvat achilat and oneg Shabbat. Bnei Yisrael, we love the mitzvah of eating and oneg Shabbat. That was the Rosh saying that. It's a famous statement the Rosh says. You know, I wonder if there's some sort of connection between this and Sukkot, that the Rabbenutam and the Rosh see the ikar of dwelling as eating, like on Shabbat. Perhaps there's some sort of connection, but that's not for now. Anyway, coming back. So Rabbenutam is adamant that the yeshiva means eating. Therefore, according to Rabbenutam, if you have not eaten in the sukkah, you can't make the blessing. Now, we talked about rain. Even according to the Rosh, that you need to eat in the sukkah when it's raining on the first night, he's certainly not suggesting you to sleep there. Yeah? No one's ever suggested that. Even the greatest mahmirim have never ventured to say if it's raining, you should be sleeping in the sukkah, even on the first night. That's not up for discussion. But somehow, for Rabbenutam and the Rosh, the obligation to eat in the sukkah is not intrinsically connected to the obligation to dwell in the sukkah. And it's possible to be obligated to eat in the sukkah, but still not to have to dwell or sleep in the sukkah. Because then an obligation to eat in the sukkah is derived from Gzera Shabbat, from Pesach 15:15, and therefore there's a separate mitzvah to eat even though you're not dwelling. According to the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, such a proposition is impossible. It makes no sense. How can you divide dwelling and eating? Because when the Torah talks about dwelling, right, the obligation to dwell in the sukkah, you can't have an obligation to eat in the sukkah yet not dwell in the sukkah. That makes no sense, right? It's not about the Torah obligating me. Isn't about obligating me to eat in the sukkah. It's about making me dwell in the sukkah. Therefore, you can't come and tell me now in your obligation the first night when it's raining, eat in the sukkah, but don't sleep in the sukkah. It makes no sense. It's impossible for Rambam and Shulchan Aruch. Therefore, we don't do that. Again, it boils down to what's the ikar mitzvah of sukkah. Is it the achila? Is it the eating? Or is it everything else? That's why, coming on to point number 3 now, that's why Shulchan Aruch paskins that you make the blessing of leshev first. Why? Because according to the Rosh and Rabbenutam, it's all about eating. Therefore, you say hamotzi on the eating first, and only then do you say leshev basukah, because the ikar mitzvah again is the eating. Therefore, you say hamotzi first. But according to Shulchan Aruch, don't do the eating. According to Rambam, don't do the eating. Don't do the dwelling. As soon as I come in, the first thing I do before the bread I eat, the first thing I do is leshev basukah. Have a look. Mishnah Berurah speaks it says it very clearly. Here, he says, he's explaining the Rabbenutam and the Rosh here. You say hamotzi first and then leshev basukah. Kadesh yatchil beseuda da'al yadahu ikar chiyuv basukah v'achar kach yivarech. You begin with hamotzi because that's the main reason why you're saying leshev basukah. Therefore, you should say hamotzi and only then leshev basukah. Again, it boils down to the same mahloket. Is yeshiva eating or is yeshiva dwelling? Point number 4. Do you do kiddush standing or sitting? According to the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch, it's the mitzvah of yeshiva. It's the mitzvah of sitting and dwelling in the sukkah, which is the main mitzvah. Therefore, you should say kiddush and leshev basukah standing up, and only then sit down. So that the blessing of leshev basukah should be prior to your dwelling. I haven't yet begun my dwelling yet. I'm still standing up. So you do kiddush, you say leshev basukah, and now you sit down because now you're beginning your dwelling. However, according to the Rosh, the main mitzvah is the eating. Therefore, you say the blessing of leshev basukah sitting down, because that goes together with the act of eating. Again, Mishnah Berurah speaks it out very clearly in 643:4. Not going to be the inside, but have a look there. Siman 643, Sif Katan 4. Same machloket again. What's the principle? According to Rambam, the principle is dwelling, and therefore say the bracha standing up, and only then begin your dwelling by sitting down. According to the Ramah and the Rosh, no, it's nothing to do with the dwelling. It's got to do with eating. Therefore, I sit down and only then say the bracha. Yeah, that's a very good point, Samuel. That's an excellent point. You're right. If you were to be standing up for a long time, you would say Leshev Sukkah. But the Rambam is saying, because you're anyway going to sit down, and Leshev Sukkah has two connotations. Leshev can mean to dwell, and it can also mean to sit. Therefore, you're anyway going to sit in a minute. Therefore, yeah, Jack, exactly. Yeah, there's a mahloket within what Leshev means. In the opinion of dwelling, doesn't mean to dwell or to sit. Yeah, but let's not go into that now. That's point number 4. This can also explain why on Sukkot you're allowed to eat a kabetza outside the Sukkah. If the ikar of the mitzvah is about eating like Rabbenutam holds, then our question stands seemingly. So why is this eating different from all other eatings? And it should be a kazait. But as we've explained for Rambam, Shulchan Aruch, and all other Sephardi Rishonim, it's not about eating, it's about dwelling. Eating is just a type of dwelling. Therefore, I can understand why I can eat more than a kazait, because it's still achilat arai. It's eating which is normally done outside of a dwelling. The whole mitzvah is about dwelling. This kind of eating is an eating which is normally done outside a dwelling. On the go, I will eat a kazait. I'm not going to eat a kabetza on the go. Therefore, because the mitzvah is yeshiva, it's about dwelling, it's not about sitting, it's not about eating, I mean. Therefore, it's not the regular achilah for kazait, it's a kabetza. According to Rabbenutam, you're going to have to say that since the main mitzvah is eating, it still has to be within the parameters of yeshiva. And yeshiva has to be keva, not arai. But it fits much better, it fits in much more nice, far more nicely for the Rambam than it does for the Rabbenutam. Now, coming to point number 6, with regards to, and we're ending this point and then we'll move on to a different topic. With regards to on Shabbat, if you find yourself out of Sukkah, what should you do? We saw there was a mahlok in there. Again, using our same yesod, our same principle, it fits in beautifully. Rabbeinu Avigdor from Vienna is obviously following Rabbenutam's philosophy. The yeshiva in Sukkah is all about eating. Therefore, it makes sense for me to go and take an example from Terumot and Maasrot, which is all about eating. Maasrot, I have a halacha that Shabbat and Chag is kovea. Even a temporary eating fixes the meal and makes it considered a fixed seudah. If all you have in Sukkah is achilah, if that's your main concept of Sukkah, then I see the comparison to Maaser, it's an excellent comparison. But the Hida and the other Sephardi Achronim reject this, because we haven't viewed the Sukkah as eating. The Sukkah is about dwelling. Therefore, you can't bring me proofs from something which is purely about eating. Even if the criterion for Achilat Keva is in Masrot, is that Shabbat and Chag is Kovea, and makes it a fixed seudah, that still doesn't make a difference. You don't start with Achilah according to Rambam. You start with Dirah. Since less than an egg is not a Dirat Keva, less than a kabetza is not a proper eating, then it's allowed, even though for Maaser it's Achilat Keva. I don't care what Maaser is. It doesn't make a difference to me that in Maaser eating a kazait, eating is Kovea. That's not the principle here. What I need to know is what's a yeshiva. And finally, the 7th point, and we'll end with this. Why do we say al achilat sukkah? Why do we say l'sheva sukkah, not al yeshivat sukkah? So again, there's a big discussion in the Rishonim. It is in Pesachim. There's a big discussion when we say al and when we say le. There's so many opinions in the Rishonim. Tosfot in Pesachim right at the beginning, leva'er al biur chametz. Tosfot there says there's no rule in the matter. He says you can't find a sufficient answer for this, and it's just sometimes it's le, sometimes it's al. But one of the opinions of the many opinions is the Rosh. The Rosh says something interesting. He says that when you do something as a one-off, right, then you say the bracha al. When something's ongoing, you say le. So for example, tefillin is the whole day. Okay, we only do it for half an hour in the morning, but it's really the whole day. Therefore, you say lehem yahtefillin. Matzah is eating the matzah. That's it. It's just the one action of eating the matzah. It's al achilat matzah. Al tevilah. on the tevilah. It's immersing the utensil, the person in the mikveh, and that's it. You go in and out. It's 1 second, the job's done. It's finished. Leshev b'sukkah fits in very nicely if we understand the mitzvah of Sukkot as being yeshiva, as a whole spectrum of dwelling. It's not confined to the act of eating. If it was confined to an act of eating, then you could argue perhaps you should be al achilat sukkah, al yeshivat sukkah. It's on the dwellings. It's one action of the eating. But if you hold that it's like we hold the Sephardim, that it's actually it's a whole existence in the sukkah. It's a whole dwelling. It's a whole living. And then the bracha of leshev b'sukkah is actually perfect and fits in beautifully with this opinion. Rambam is clear that it's every time one enters to leshev, and this precedes the bracha on eating. What do you mean by that, Daniel? What are you trying to say with that?
I'm just trying to, I mean, it's because of what you said about, is the principle that we're discussing really about eating, or is it about dwelling? And if it's about dwelling, then he said, look, he says it's every time you come into leshev, right? So,
but what does it mean? What does it mean? Leshev mean?
So according to the bracha that you say, it's about the specific act of coming in and placing yourself in the sukkah, right? And you could be doing that and because you could do it even if you're not eating. So then
are you asking why, according to Rambam, should you do kiddush standing up if you anyway come into the sukkah?
No. I'm just trying. I'm trying to work out what the intent is according to the Rambam, as opposed to the ikar. I mean, the thing that we heard just before is, okay, if you live in like Iraq, you'll be in your sukkah living and sleeping and all this thing, and if you're in Germany, you're probably only going in there to eat. So that's
exactly the point I was going to say. So someone just asked in the chat box, why any theories why the European rabbis believe the cow was eating, the Sephardi had a broader, more elastic focus. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yes, the weather.
It's obvious.
Sorry.
It's obvious. And you see this, I brought you now 7 examples where it fits in so beautifully and it's clear. Rabbenutam was the first one to come up with this. Where on earth did he get this from? Why does he think that Teshvu b'Sukkot is achilah? The answer is because he looks around and no one's dwelling in the sukkah. How on earth can you ask me in the middle of France, in the middle of Europe, in the freezing cold in October, to sit in the sukkah? Therefore, I have to reinterpret the mitzvah of yeshivat sukkah to mean that's eating. And therefore, the main thing is eating. And therefore, all of this follows. All the 7 points we've said follows from this. But for us, in the middle of the Middle East, wherever you are, and where the Torah was given in Eretz Yisrael, in the Midbar, it makes perfect sense. It's a whole holistic approach. It's dwelling. So,
or in Western Sepharad.
Yeah, exactly. It's still hot there. Yeah.
Well, which he specifically calls out in the Mishnah Torah, and he says it's a minhag of Sfarad. Right? So it's not actually, he's not saying this is a halachic principle. He's saying this is a minhag of Sfarad.
What's a minhag?
The lesheving. Sorry, not lesheving. The standing up for kiddush.
Who Rambam writes that?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Because really, according to Rambam, theoretically, you could do the bracha as soon as you walk into the sukkah.
But surely that's why does the Rambam?
I agree with that. But since you're anyway going to be sitting down in a second, therefore, to make the principle, make it clear that it's over asiyatans before. That's why you're doing it, right? So look, I don't want to dwell on this. I don't want to mind the plan. I don't want to dwell on this for too long. And when I say dwell, I mean dwelling, as in dwelling, not eating. I don't want to dwell on this for too long, but I just wanted to show you how you can take so many different arguments between the Rishonim and distill it to one nikuda, to one principle, and even that one principle is all based. Look, this is my own argument. I think it's extremely feasible, and I really think it makes a lot of sense. Because otherwise, what pushed Rabbenutam to come to such a conclusion? Now, why did he come? He doesn't explain. He just says, "Ikari shiba is achila," and it's, to me, it's Baruch Hama, it's clear as sun. And this is because it was contextualized where he was living. And all the further points which follow from this, whether it's Maaseh, whether it's standing or sitting, whether it's all of this, all follows from this principle. So for us Faradim at least, we should know that our mitzvah is to dwell. However, the question which you have to decide for yourselves is now we're living in England. So, so in England, do we follow Rabbenutam because of the cold, or do we follow Harambam? So that's something you have to make a decision for yourself. Okay, I want to move on. We only got 16 minutes left, and there's 3 other points I want to get through. So, and the third point is really another beautiful principle which I want to share with you. So, just one other point on Sukkot briefly. I mentioned this one once in the past, but it's a very important idea. All the Rishonim ask, this idea I heard from Rabbenutam Halevi. Why do we have Sukkot in Tishrei? Why not in the summer? Yeah, Sukkot falls in October, September, end of September, early October, mid-October. Yeah, always in the autumn. Why does it not fall in the summer? You know, all we're commemorating is that our ancestors traveled through the desert. So why do it now? So the Vilna Gaon has an explanation because of the Luchot. I'm not going to go into that now. The Torah says, this is the Torah, it's not the Rosh, this is the Torah. The Torah says that the reason is because summer, everyone goes out to sit in the sukkah, right? You know, it's you go out to sit in a hut, you go to enjoy the sunshine. You only get a couple of months of sunshine in Europe. And therefore, you know, if you were to do it in the summer and July, August, it wouldn't be recognizable that you're doing the mitzvah for Hashem. Rather, you're doing the mitzvah to have good fun outside. The Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, now the Ramban says something similar but different. Ramban ala Torah says something very similar but it's different though. However, Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, this is in Chelek Gimel, chapter 43, he says the exact opposite. He says that Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us the mitzvah of Sukkot specifically in the month of October in Tishrei because that's the time when it's the most ideal to sit in a sukkah. If Hashem was to give us the mitzvah in the sukkah in the middle of August, it's too hot. We're not going to enjoy the mitzvah. It's going to detract from our enjoyment of the mitzvah. Therefore, God says, look, wait, I'm going to give you the chance to do the mitzvah when it suits you the best. Look at the 2 different approaches to a basic mitzvah here. And this reflects 2 different worldviews of the purpose of mitzvot. According to the Torah, the mitzvot are there to test us. They are to challenge us. They are there to see, are you gonna listen to me? Are you gonna overcome your natural inclination to sit outside, not to sit outside because it's a bit cold now? If I give it to you in the summer, there's no test. It's easy. I'm gonna give it to you in October. When it's difficult for you, are you still gonna do it? The mitzvot are there to test you. According to the Rambam, the mitzvot aren't there to act as something which you have to overcome and rise above. Yeah? Hashem gives mitzvot to enhance our life. It's to make us live our lives as people connected to the world around us and connected to Kadosh Baruch Hu. Therefore, for the Rambam, actually, the purpose of the mitzvah is to enhance you want to give it to you the best time, the time when you're going to enjoy the most. When are you going to enjoy the most? You're going to enjoy the most in October, when it's not too hot and not too cold. In August, in Tammuz, you're not going to enjoy it. Therefore, Kadosh Baruch Hu gives us the mitzvah. That's another place Moira writes about the Harvest Festival. Have a look, Chelek Gimel 43. 343, Moreh Nevuchim, he says this idea. So this is another beautiful idea. You see the difference in approaches to things and the way it reflects their worldviews to their reasons for the mitzvah. Okay. Now, in the remaining 13 minutes, I want to discuss 2 things on Yom Kippur. Now, this isn't so much Ashkenaz vs. Sfarad. Okay, Tefillah Chol Hamoed I'll discuss. These are all amazing questions. I love all these questions, and I want to go through all of them. If you hang on to 9:30, I'll go through all of them. Okay, Tefillah Chol Hamoed I would love to talk about that. But let me try to finish in the remaining time which we have what we can. This isn't so much Ashkenaz vs. Sfarad. This is more Kabbalah versus Sfarad. And I want to show you something fascinating here. I'm not going to show you all the sources. I'm just going to tell you, and you can look it up afterwards. We know if you say now Ha'el HaKadosh So the Hamelech HaKadosh, you have to repeat the Amidah. This is the time necessary to make Tshuva. If you don't say Hamelech HaKadosh, you go back. What happens if you said Melech Tzedakah Mishpat? You didn't say Hamelech HaMishpat like you're meant to be saying now during the 10 days of Teshuvah. What's the halacha? Shulchan Aruch rules very clearly in 2 places that you need to go back. You have to go back because you didn't say Hamelech HaMishpat, the king of justice. You just said Melech Oher, he likes justice. You didn't say that he is now sitting in judgment. Therefore, you have to return. This is the opinion of almost all the Rishonim. Almost all the Rishonim. When I say almost all, I'm not exaggerating. However, brings, I would say, about 30 Rishonim who all say this, that you have to go back. There is one Rishon, Talmidei de Rabbeinu Yonah, who says that actually you don't go back. Why? Because you mentioned, because you said Melech Tzedakah Mishpat, you mentioned that God is a king. Since you mentioned that God is a king, although you didn't say HaMelech HaMishpat, you said Melech Tzedakah Mishpat, that's sufficient, you don't go back. Now, the Ramah follows this opinion, and that's generally how the Ashkenazim are posek, that if you didn't say HaMelech HaMishpat, you don't have to go back. All the Sephardi Ahronim, that Hida, Kafhaim Falaji, Nahar Shalom, Ma'amar Mordechai, Hacham Ovadia, all follow the Shulchan Aruch, despite the old age principle which we have of Sabal, Safek Barachot Lehakel. Says Hacham Ovadia 2 things. Number 1, he says that there are so many Rishonim in this that it's not even a Sabal, it's not even a Mahloket anymore. It's clear cut that you need to go back. Secondly, he says Minhag. There's a third thing which he says, I'm not going to go into this in detail now for lack of time. He wants to argue that the rest of the brachot are going to be bracha levatala. Okay, that's a fascinating thing, which it's not for now, but he wants to argue that the rest of the brachot are going to be bracha levatala. Let's leave that aside for the moment. Comes along the Ben Ish Hai. Ben Ish Hai says no. Safek brachot la'akel, therefore don't go back. Don't go back. Why? We have one opinion to Rabbenutam. The Ramah follows this. We have to follow the Ramah, and therefore do not go back. Continue without returning to say Hamelech HaMishpat. Okay, look, that's the Ben Ish Hai. Ben Ish Hai often follows the Ramah, and therefore that makes sense. Great. Now, what happens this coming Friday night? This coming Friday night, we say Arvit. After Arvit, we say Birkat Me'en Sheva. What's Birkat Me'en Sheva? This is the tefillah of which was instituted. The Gemara tells us. This is what the Gemara tells us. The Gemara in Shabbat tells us instituted for the latecomers. People would come late, and they start the Amidah late, and they're going to end up having to leave the synagogue late. And walking back through the fields late at night is dangerous. Therefore, Chachamim said on Friday night, we're going to institute a short blessing afterwards. Baruch Atah Hashem, what do we say? All of that, we're going to institute that blessing to give extra time for the latecomers. They must have drawn out this bracha, to give extra time for the latecomers, but yeah. Now, what happens during that bracha? You say, Baruch Atah Hashem. Who can remind you of the bracha? It's tipped my mind now. What's the bracha? Come on, someone remind me, please. No. Birkat Me'en Sheva. No, before that, the beginning of it. Baruch Atah Hashem.
Magen Avot Bidvaro.
Okay, good, thank you. Magen Avot Bidvaro. Nachayim Etim B'mamaro. Ha'el HaKadosh she'en kamahu. What happens if there you said Ha'el HaKadosh and you didn't say HaMelech HaKadosh? Vast majority of the poskim, of course you don't go back. Why? Because this whole bracha which we're saying was only instituted for the latecomers. It's not necessary. It's not really required. You're doing it as okay. So you didn't say Melech HaKadosh. You said El HaKadosh. You should have said the Melech. You didn't say it. Fine. You're not going to go back and repeat the bracha. That's the majority of the poskim. Now, what would you expect the Ben Ish Hai to say? I would expect Ben Ish Hai Safek brachot la'akel. Of course, you don't go back. Comes along the Ben Ish Hai and says, Friday night you didn't say El HaKadosh. You didn't say you said El HaKadosh. You need to go back and repeat the bracha. Why? Why? You're the one who always says Safek Brachot La'akel. The reason being is because, although the reason we explained about the fields, that's the Gemara's reason. The Kabbalah has a different reason. I don't know what the reason is, but the Kabbalah has a different reason. And according to the Sod, this bracha mein Sheva, this bracha which we say, is actually like a repetition. It's required just like any other repetition which we say during the week. Just like during the week, we say the repetition Shahrit al-Minha, and according to the Kabbalah, these cannot be omitted, they are essential to the service. This is a big question now, Yom Kippur about omitting. According to the Kabbalah, you can't omit any of this. This is strictly required, the repetition. Therefore, says the Ben Ish Chai, according to the Kabbalah, Birkat Mein Sheva is exactly the same as a Chazarah. As you said, Daniel, correctly. It's exactly the same as a Chazarah. Therefore, because it's the same as a Chazarah, you have to go back. Just have a look here, and I want you to appreciate what this means here. Just take the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai is the one who's willing to go against all the Rishonim when it comes to Melech Tzedakah Mishpat. And he's willing to say, you need to go back. You don't go back. Why? Because there's one Rishon, and there's the Ramah who says that you don't go back. Because of Safek Brachot La'akel, and this one opinion, I'm going to override all these many Rishonim and the Shulchan Aruch. But when it comes to something which is by the Arizal, when it comes to something based on Kabbalah, no. Then I have to repeat it, despite the overriding principle of Safek Brachot La'akel. This shows you how important philosophy, how important halachic frameworks are when learning halakha. Halakha is not decided in a vacuum, and a person's whole upbringing, a person's whole view of halakha and the interplay between halakha and Kabbalah has such an influence on the way you posek halakha. Yeah. You can't explain this Ben Ish Chai otherwise. How on earth do you get him saying that you don't go back for Melech Tzedakah Mishpat, but you do go back for Birkat Mein Sheva? Only because the Kabbalah and the Ben Ish Chai's philosophy has a greater value than halakha. And therefore for him he's willing to say something. Exactly the opposite. You do go back for Melech Tzedakah Mishpat, but you don't go back for El HaKadosh, because that's not necessary according to halakha. Only according to Kabbalah you need it. So again, you see the importance of the how important is a person's philosophy when it comes to deciding halakha. That's why the Mishnah tells us, Selech harav. You can't hop from one rabbi to another rabbi, because rabbis will give psakim, and sometimes someone will say to you, this rabbi said that. Okay, this rabbi said that, but he has that framework. I'm operating in a different framework. What do you want from me? I have a whole different view on halakha and Kabbalah and all everything else, how they interplay with each other. Therefore, I come to a different conclusion. Aselech harav. You need to choose one philosophy and one outlook. The last thing I'll say, and then we'll take questions in 3 minutes. I'll say this quickly. I'll just share the screen with you. It's self-explanatory. Minhag kaparot. This is well known, but it's worthwhile bringing this. Ma shenoagim la'asot kapara b'erev Yom Kippur, lishchot tam negol. Yesh limnoa minhag. The custom to slaughter the chicken and wave it around the head should be stopped. Should not do this minhag. Here he is quoting a Rashba and a Ramban, who both say that this is darkei mori. This basically means it's suspect. It's avodah zarah suspect, and therefore you should not do this. Says the Rama, ויש מהגאונים שכתבו מנהג זה, כן כתבו אותו רבים מן האחרונים, וכן נוהגים בכל מידות אלו, ואין לשנות קיום מנהג. Says the Rama, this is a widespread minhag, and the truth is the Rama is right. The Rama is right that actually the weight of the Geonim is in favor of the Rama. If you look through the first one was the Ramban and Rashba to come along and question this practice. It was very widespread before they came along. In fact, in the old Nuschaot, in the old versions of the Shulchan Aruch, the Keteh Shem Tov brings this down. Instead of saying Yesh limnoa minhag kaparot, you should refrain. He says it's minhag shel shtut. It's a custom of frivolity. It's wrong. You shouldn't be doing it. And look, nonetheless, it's a widespread custom of many of all the Ashkenazim and many Sfaradim. Because why? Once again, what do you think made the Sfaradim do this? Who changed it from the Shulchan Aruch?
Kabbalah.
The Arizal came along and said this is very important. And of course, what do you expect? The Middle East, the Iraqis, the Syrians, they all do this, the chickens. Okay, I'm sure. My father tells me that they used to do this in Syria. I'm sure the Iraqis will tell you to do it. I'm sure it's a common minhag. But of course, the S&P and the Western Sephardi didn't do so because we weren't influenced by the Kabbalah. So that's something which we just think about. And today, anyway, what happens in these places is it's very suspect. Leaving aside Darkei Mori and Minhag Shel Shtut, there's many other things going on there which are dodgy. So I don't think that it's recommended today. In conclusion, we have seen 4 ideas. Yom Kippur and Sukkot through a Sephardi lens. The first thing we saw was this big mahloket rishonim. What's the ikar mitzvah of yeshivat sukkah? Is it the dwelling, or is it the eating? And we explained with this 7 principles. We explained the seven mahlokot, 7 arguments, 7 ideas. We explained with this 1 principle. And for us Sephardim, we go after Rambam. It's about dwelling, not about eating. Second thing we saw was this contrasting worldviews between when the mitzvah of Sukkot was given. Is it to challenge us like the Torah? Is it actually to enhance our mitzvah of the Sukkah like the Rambam? Thirdly, we saw the interplay of Halakha and Kabbalah in the Ben Ish Chai's thought and how it goes that Hamelech HaMishpat, you don't go back, Ha'el HaKadosh and Kamo, you do go back. And finally, Kaparot we've seen, but according to Shulchan Aruch, you should refrain from doing this. According to the Ramah, you do it, and how the contrast within Sephardim themselves, whether we do it or not. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed that. I want to wish everyone who's leaving now to school Shim Rabot, fast well. Hashem, Kadosh Baruch Hu answer our prayers. May all be written the Sefer HaHaim Tovim.
Amen.
I'm happy to stay on.
Yes, Rabbi, that's okay. If we can get a few of the questions in.
If you want to leave, feel free to leave. But I'll go through the questions. Okay, didn't catch it properly. Which Geonim was the Ramah referring to the Kaparot? Many Geonim. I can't remember the names, but many Geonim bring down this minhag. And the first one to question was the Ramban and the Rashba. It could be Daniel, or a Torah Gaon maybe, if you say so. But it's brought down by a number. It's not one. It's brought down by a number of Geonim to do so. Okay, but they never, Yeshua, they never suspected there was that. No one ever brought up the problem of Darkei Mori. That was the first one, was the Ramban and the Rashba to bring down. Okay, Salonika did my father told me, yeah, interesting. Wow, interesting. Adrian's telling us that in Salonika they did do kaparot, and they did it in Shepherd's Bush as well in the garden. Okay, fine. Scrolling up. Tefillin and Chol HaMoed. Oh, okay, fine. Let me come back to. Let's just do any other questions which are relevant to the shiur, and we'll come back to Tefillin and Chol HaMoed. So, Gesh, so Harambam would agree that we living in UK would simply be patur. Well, that's the question which I said. You need to decide for yourselves how mitzvah you are. Again, it will depend on the weather. It will depend on your constitution. Yeah, it's very difficult to fulfill the mitzvah of yeshiva. Every Sukkot, I think to myself, this mitzvah wasn't given for England at least. It just doesn't make sense. You can't have Be'erev Sukkot Teshvu Shivat Yamim. Who knows? Maybe the weather will change. David, did we mention for the Gezerah Shavah? Yes, we did learn the Gezerah Shavah. But how do you learn the Gezerah Shavah is the question, right? Do you learn the Gezerah Shavah l'chol midei, as the Rabbenutam and the Rosh learn for everything, or do you learn it that it's only Gezerah Shavah when you're eating in the sukkah, when you have a chiyuv in the sukkah? You still with me, David? I don't know if you're still with us. Are you still with us, David? Do you understand? Yeah, David's asking that as a Gezerah Shavah of 2-2, Tetvav. And the Rabbenutam, you're right, they do bring that down. But why do you learn the Gezerah Shavah for only Achila? Do you understand my point? You could learn the Gezerah Shavah to be more holistic, to be only when there's a mitzvah of Yeshiva is the mitzvah of Achewit, which is how the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch learn. Do you understand?
Yes. No, I guess my main point there was that I think you don't have to say the only reason is because of the weather. It's more specifically how they apply the Gezer Shava.
Okay, I understand, but then the question is, why did they explain the Gezer Shava like that? That's my question. Why did they explain the Gezer Shava in this manner, not another manner?
Okay, fine.
Again, that's my own theory. It could be rubbish. That's not the point. But what we clearly do see is this Machlokes Rishonim between Rabbenutam and the Rambam has so many practical nafkaminot, and it all stems to this central point. What's the mitzvah? Is the mitzvah eating or is it dwelling?
Sure.
Anything I've answered you, Avi Gasson. Daniel, we've spoken about. Okay.
And you mentioned the Torah with regards to the reason of sitting outside.
Correct.
Was to challenge us. Did he say it's to challenge us or to make it recognizable?
Okay, that's a fair point. I'm happy you picked me up on that. That's true. He does write. He writes Sheyen Nikar. Yeah. Okay. I admit. I do accept that, David. That's a good point. He does say the point is that, let's read it out. Kedushin is gone. דרך כל אדם לעשות סוכה לצב לא הייתה ניכרת עשייתנו בהם שהם במצוות הבורא יתברך. ולכן שציווה אותנו שנעשה סוכות בחודש השביעי שהוא זמן הגשמים דרך כל אדם אצל סוכתו ולשב בביתו. ואנחנו יוצאים מהבית לשב בסוכה, בזה יראה לכל שזה. I hear you. That's a fair point. I accept that point, David. It could be that the Torah is saying it's just about other people, that they recognize us.
But Rabbi, it's important to mention.
One second, what did you say, David?
Yeah, I agree that it's not like it's not a summer holiday, but it's bearable.
It's bearable, I understand. But the point is that we want to show that we're doing it for Hashem and not for anything else.
Absolutely.
As opposed to the Rambam, where no, I'm giving you the best time when it's going to be the most enjoyable for you, and we don't care that you're going out to the best time, which is the time most enjoyable for you. That's my point. You're right. I could have framed the Torah. I could have worded the Torah slightly better.
But Rav, if I could just say, it's important. It's very important. I always like to go back to context. The environment of not just the Rosh, but obviously the Torah, the son of the Rosh, the environment they were living in was very much a cultural debate about which community can suffer as much as possible in their zealousness and commitment to God. So in the Christian environment that they were amidst, it was very much a pietistic, zealous.
Did you mention that with relation to Sukkah?
No, but it's about the context that they're living in. So there are many things where they're not developing in a vacuum.
If he says it, then I'll agree.
Yeah, he's right. Well, David, I have to agree with David on this. I have to agree with David on this. He doesn't say it clearly.
It's not about what he says. There's a lot of things many people don't say. It's very much about the context you live in. Nothing is developed in a vacuum. And everything is theorizing. But at the end of the day, we cannot ignore the elephant in the room, which was that studying the history of the Christian empire and the Christian environment relative to the Muslim environment, there was very much an influence of, it's very well known, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein talks about it, where that influence did impact halachic decisions. So whether someone consciously is aware of it or not, the same way that we consciously aren't aware that giving Hanukkah presents is derived from the Christmas Christian environment that we're in, those things are developed as a result of the society that we're living in. To ignore them is just ignoring the elephant in the room.
Possibly, it could be. It doesn't.
Nothing is developed in a vacuum, my friend. Nothing.
I hear that.
Okay, I think we'll take this conversation offline. Daniel Jonas, the Kafahayim, I'm sorry to tell you, the Kafahayims you referred to me are both Kafahayims in Ilchot Shabbat. I'm sorry to tell you, the Orot Sukkot Mahzor has made a mistake. Because Kafahayim in Ilchot Sukkah clearly says that you stand up for thingy. Okay? Both the references you brought, 271 are in the context of Ilchot Shabbat. And in Shabbat we sit down for Kiddush. Exactly. They've taken that and they've applied that to Sukkot as well. The difference being on Sukkot meant to stand up before. I'll find you the exact reference in Kafahayim in Ilchot Sukkah by tomorrow morning. Okay, there's lots. If you want to unmute yourself, you've got questions, it'll be better rather than going through. There's lots of there's too many questions in the chat. So just unmute yourself if you have a question.
Does someone have a question?
Okay. Tefillin Sukkot, please. Okay, Tefillin Sukkot. So look, what should I tell you? The minhag of all Sephardim is not to be, it's a shvera sugya. Yes, Yehoshua ben Zadon, it's a shvera sugya. It's a very shvera sugya. And every Chol HaMoed, I find it very difficult. But there's lots of things we do which are minhag, and something which we have to, look, I want to say something important here. That's as follows. However much we need to understand our Chachamim, where they came from, their context and everything, we have to also appreciate that Kadosh Baruch Hu is guiding the whole Mesorah process. Okay? And that means that I find it very difficult that Kadosh Baruch Hu will make a situation where the vast majority of Jews are not doing something right on Chol HaMoed. All Sephardim, even S&P, don't wear tefillin on Chol HaMoed. Even S&P. Majority of Ashkenazim don't wear. Yeah, because Germans wear, yeah, fine. Majority of Ashkenazim don't wear. And it's amazing how the Zohar has had such influence. It's basically based on the Zohar. The Zohar says that you don't wear tefillin on Chol HaMoed. And it's had a lot of influence. But what can I say? I know the Zohar is a discussion for another time. I'm not getting into that now. By the end of the day, this is Minhag Yisrael, and I wouldn't want to see people changing the Minhag Yisrael. So I don't have much. I can't say much about it. Our hands are tied. We have a Mesorah, which has been the Rambam's mashma. The Rambam's not mafurish, but it's pretty clear in the Rambam. Yes, true. But look, there's many things which we do against the Rambam today. We don't make a bracha. We Sephardim, everything which I've said tonight, we still do not make a bracha when we sleep in the sukkah. We don't make a bracha when we hang around the sukkah. We only make a bracha when we 3 pillars of halakha, Yehoshua, the Rambam and the Rif, and even the Rosh Hashanah opinion holds that we only make a bracha, on sukkah on any dwelling. Yet, nonetheless, the minhag is we don't. You only make it al-akhirah. So, you see, minhag trumps halakha. You see clearly in Maran whenever he says nahagu. So you have to say the same with tefillin Chol HaMoed. So I'm absolutely not advocating that we should be wearing tefillin Chol HaMoed. It's difficult to find university adopted minhag. Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think anyone can think of. Is there such a thing as a minhag which is accepted amongst the
Simchat Torah.
Sorry?
Simchat Torah.
Simchat Torah. Yeah, it's a takanat geonim.
It's very old, very old.
It's very old. Exactly. It's a long, long time ago. The whole celebration of Simchat Torah is more recent. Yes, I'm saying the concept of finishing once a year goes back a long time. Although initially it used to be every 3 years, but once a year is a long time ago. Simchat Torah is different. Which minhagim do we have? Which I don't think there are. Are there any minhagim which are? Well, the Rambam says nahagu ba'aseret yemei tshuva kol am Yisrael, he writes. Kol Bet Israel, nahagu to increase our slichot, which I think is university adopted minhag. That everyone increases slichot during a Seder Tshuva. Anyway, look, lots to discuss, but it's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Rav.
Thank you. Discussion about everyone.
Very good.
Thank you, everybody. See you next week.
Can I ask a question? So where the Rabbi gives the heter of not sleeping in the sukkah, he says he doesn't think it's because of the cold climate. He says, where is it?
639.
יש ממשום שנאה, תיש סער, לישון במקומות הקרים, ולי נראה באיש וביתו.
Why does he have to come on to Isha Beito?
Yeah, why does he? It seems that he doesn't want to leave it to the cold climate.
So what's your question? Why is he not considering this mitzvah? What exactly is your question?
why does the Ramah seem to have a problem with saying it's because of the cold climate that we haven't been sleeping in the sukkah? Instead, he wants to give a whole explanation of why halachically it wouldn't work to sleep in the sukkah under certain circumstances and go around it that way. But it would be much simpler if he just said, like Rabbeinu Tam, that you don't sleep in the sukkah if it's too cold. He doesn't say that's the reason.
Because that's not the practice. Lots of people very rarely sleep in the sukkah, even when it's manageable.
No, but Jack's asking, why was the Ramah not happy with the reason of Ishul Betor?
Very simple, because of the environment they were living in. We can't divorce the reality that they were living in a pietistic environment where it was the more you suffer, the more you're closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
No, I'm sorry, I don't think that's right. I don't think that's right.
I go with Aaron Lichtenstein.
It's the opposite in this case. They're not telling them to sleep in the sukkah because it's too cold.
I think it's because...
No one's saying that, but it's not an excuse why you shouldn't.
Look, this may be a bit controversial.
Difference.
This may be a bit controversial. I don't know. I would want to. Look, you have to understand. We're living now in a time where we appreciate that there's been a whole history of Sephardi and Ashkenaz. When you're living in Poland, and this is all you know, I'm saying this with the greatest kavod. I'm not in any way, this is all you have, then you view as Poland as being the place of the Torah. Just like people in different Hasidic courts, they think that where the Rebbe is, that's everything's based around there. Again, I'm not saying this with any lack of kavod. I'm just saying let's come from the context of this is where we keep the Torah. We live in Poland. We've lived in Poland for generations, and this is where we are, and this is where the Torah is. Therefore, to attribute it to Tzina is basically saying that the whole mitzvah goes out the window, basically. You see what I'm saying? Jack, you see what I'm saying?
Not quite. Can you explain the last bit?
Tina, do you understand what I'm saying?
I want you to continue.
What I'm saying is if you come to the Sfara of Ishul Betor, him and his wife, then that's a halachic principle. And therefore, that makes sense to say, the Torah gave you a mitzvah, okay, but I also have a duty to my wife, and therefore I can sleep inside. Yeah, that everything fits in. So we have a mitzvah in the Torah, which makes sense. We have another principle, and therefore I go inside. But if the whole thing is tzina, then that basically means that the whole mitzvah basically doesn't really make sense, because the whole mitzvah, and when you're living in that environment, then the Torah is Poland. The Torah was given here. I know, obviously the Ramah knew that the Torah wasn't given in Poland. But you view the whole Torah through this context of Europe and living in Poland. That's what I'm saying. Again, I'm not saying...
It's not a Ramah thing, it's a human thing, 100%.
Exactly.
It's a human thing. Yeah.
He's saying it would be hard for him to picture that there are places, let's say in Israel, where you can sleep out in the warmth. I
would imagine. We're living a different experience. We know, we travel, we see different environments, we see different places. So it's not hard for us to say that was for here, but this isn't for here. But for the Ramah, this is Poland, this is Torah, this is where we keep the Torah. You're going to tell me the whole mitzvah wasn't meant to be given then.
Perhaps more charitably.
Sorry? David?
Perhaps more charitably, you could say that it was as an experiential thing rather than this is how they view Torah, but rather that people didn't necessarily know that people just sleep outside.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. That's exactly my point. That's you put it better. That's what I'm saying. This is all I know.
Subject of the environment.
Exactly.
That was my point. Exactly, Rav. It's your subject of your environment. It's not about better or worse. It's that people think that all of these developments was done within a vacuum where there were no external influences, and I think it's contrary to the whole development of Torah throughout since Revelation, to think that everything was just developed in a vacuum and we are not products of our surroundings. As you said, our halakha is very much determined by our philosophy. What's our philosophy determined by? A lot of the time around your surroundings. So to suggest that Hachamim such as Tur, Rosh, Rambam weren't influenced by their surroundings as they should be. Life is on earth, not in the sky. I think, as I said, you're ignoring the elephant in the room. It makes a lot of people uncomfortable, and it shouldn't, because that's the beauty of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's world, that the world around you develops what you do, influences what you do.
One thing about the Rama of all the Ashkenazi, rabbis, that he was criticized by, for example, Maharshal, for being into philosophy, and he was worldly compared to many of his other contemporaries.
Very.
That's true.
Very.
So for him to just, I don't know, the theory I find a bit difficult to say that he wasn't aware that the Bnei Israel traversed the Middle East.
No, I'm not saying that. Chas v'shalom. I'm not saying about that.
I know.
My experience is so much. This is all I know. I only know Poland. I only know Cold Sukkot. I don't know anything else.
No, I know. I'm just saying that it may not be wrong, but I'm saying the theory that the Rama, would be bothered by the fact that in Poland we don't keep to it, and therefore that affects his halachic framework in this context. It's just.
The Rama always says that this is just how we do it in Ashkenaz. He never says this is the minhag. It became halakha for the Ashkenazim. But Rabbi Yonatan Halevi explained beautifully in his book. The Rama, it was never this is the way the halakha should be. This was the minhag of Ashkenaz.
Sometimes, not always. It's not. It's not a principle. The Rama often says no, not like that.
But of Ashkenaz. But
yeah, always of Ashkenaz, for sure.
Always of Ashkenaz. That's what I mean. It was always of Ashkenaz.
But he's not just coming to say what the minhag is.
No, the halakha of Ashkenaz. But still, when we say the halakha of Ashkenaz, we're talking about how the Ashkenazim did halakha. It was their way of doing halakha within Ashkenaz.
I don't think that's right. I'm sorry.
Uses the word nahag a lot when it's in contrast.
I agree a lot, but not always. He often, I'm sure you've learned the Rama. He often just brings other shittot. Maran will pass like Rambam Mifrosh, and he'll bring Rabbenutam. He'll bring a Rosh. He'll bring a, Okay, everyone.
Thank you so much, Rav.
God, all the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Shkoyach.